This wetland is designed to produce the highest quality of effluent possible in Australia. Very high-tech sewage treatment plant. It's a membrane bioreactor. However, it is still not able to treat effluent to the level required for discharge in the Logan River, and hence we've got the 7.5 hectares of wetlands here which do the final polishing process. There's no pathogens coming out of the plant because of the filtration capabilities of it. It actually filters out things like E. coli and other enterococci. And phosphorus coming out of this plant is expected to be very low too, but again the wetland is going to remove significant amounts of phosphorus, nitrogen, remaining solids, any biological oxygen demand from the system. A little bit of microbes will be generated in the wetland, and in fact that is one of the biological functions of a wetland, is not to sterilise water, and indeed the water coming from the MBR plant is essentially sterile, but you don't actually want to put sterile water into a river, and so the wetland essentially environmentally primes the effluent prior to discharge into the river. Any nutrients that do come out are in the form of organically bound nutrients, as opposed to say nitrate, nitrite or ammonium, and that is a much safer form for rivers systems than if you put nitrate or ammonium into a system. And we planted 8 different species in the wetlands, and we also put in seeds of 3 other species, and some species went better than others, some were slower developers than others, some were more palatable to birds, and so we had early issues during those times. But all of the species that we planted still remain in the wetland, so that's a very good sign. But ecosystems are very dynamic. The more biomass you've got, the more surface area that you've got that's exposed to the effluent that's flowing through, then the more surface area of biofilm you've got, and it's really the biofilm in these systems that are the grunt of the system that removes the contaminants. Juncus was a plant that we grew by seed, and you can see it's actually the predominant plant in this band. So what happened is that the plants that were originally in this band didn't go very well for one reason or another, but the Juncus filled in all the gaps. So, and in fact this one, you can see the very high surface area of those stems. So I reckon that will be a brilliant constructed wetland species.
This cell here had been a problem early on in the piece, a lot of bird damage, but as you can see here, this Juncus just saved the day basically.
This is pretty good for Logan. This is our first set of major wetlands, and we're hoping to turn it into a showpiece. If any changes need to be done to how fast or how slow, we might have to slow the water flow down to enhance the product to the end.
These are twisters, and they're the outlet distribution pipes of the wetland, and you can move them up or down to adjust the water flow. You want an even flow to be distributed in the wetland so that it doesn't promote short-circuiting. You want the effluent to be mixed all through that plant community as it flows through. Even though there's only about 300 ml head between that cell and this cell, it distributes very evenly the water across the wetland. As the water flows, it's exposed to lots of different microenvironments. So it'll go from an aerobic zone to an anaerobic zone. It'll encounter different biofilm, different communities of microbes. And that diversity of environments is really a key to constructed wetlands. So we got the water sample. So I'm going to measure pH and dissolved oxygen, fairly low salinity. That's excellent for irrigation. Put it into the turbidity meter, 1.4 NTU. And just to give you a perspective on what that means, typically drinking water is around 2 milligrams or 2 NTU or 1 NTU. So this turbidity is good enough for drinking water. So it's stabilised at 7.12 milligrams per litre of dissolved oxygen and pH 7.32. That's absolutely spot on. It's got almost 4 times more oxygen than what is our discharge limit, and pH is perfect. We're pretty close to the end of the 12-month establishment stage, and over the last couple of days it's received its first amount of effluent. It's been a long journey, this one, right from the design and construction, planting, drought, birds. Once all the ecosystem adjusts to the different water quality, the plants are going to respond to it, and I predict even during these winter months the plants are going to thicken up, and there's nothing like a bit of effluent to keep a wetland plant happy. This one here is Leperonia, and these ones I harvested from another wetland, the seeds. Took a couple of months to do the whole planting, and there was a total of about 80,000 wetland plants put in initially, and then we planted about another 20,000 replanted areas that got damaged.
In a beautiful environment here near Bow Desert, it's called Cedar Grove. Logan Council, far-sighted, have decided to build a wastewater treatment plant in advance of development. As development proceeds over coming years, the wastewater treatment plant will be there and be slowly upgraded or increased to cope with it. This wetland is, at this current phase, 7.5 hectares. The wetland is built here because it's part of the licence of the wastewater treatment plant, so it's very much an integral part of it. A constructed wetland, people do call them artificial wetlands, but there's not much artificial about it. It's given a regular shape to contain and control the water in a very efficient way, in the most sustainable way. Inside the wetland cells we have these plants, which are all native wetland plants. We've put 8 species into the wetland as a whole. They're planted at the moment in bands because that's an efficient way to plant. But over time they'll organise themselves ecologically, species will advance and retreat, and not too long in the future there will be a very healthy, very robust native plant population here that can cope with water. The effluent or wastewater comes from the wastewater pre-treatment process, and then a membrane bioreactor, which is a very ultra-modern treatment system. From there the water flows by gravity down the hill, enters the wetland at one end. We have 3 flow paths. These have been in turn divided into subcells to make the water more easily controllable, and also the right length and width of these wetland cells so the plants survive. Healthy plant population is the key to a constructed wetland system. This whole treatment system has a very high standard of performance that it must meet, probably I think the highest in Australia that I've seen. The wetland was decided upon by Council and by the process as a whole that this will be the best way to do it. The wetland also provides a naturalised outflow in terms of water that has natural qualities. The pollutants are all taken out and some natural nutrients are put in, particularly around organic carbon. So this is a good thing for downstream waterways. In a sense, the water that comes from this wetland will be a form of reuse of this wastewater that is highly treated and then ecologically conditioned to re-enter the environment. The level of performance, the standard of pollutant reduction that this wetland must meet, I expect is the highest in Australia by far. We're adding native diversity in wetland plants. A question has been asked about the ecology that you might find in a constructed wetland like this, for example birds or other animals. There are no large birds usually in constructed wetlands like this. It has a primary function of treating wastewater to the ultimate degree possible. The wastewater treatment plant here will be no or very low odour. The constructed wetland will be a beautiful natural system, and there's been discussion about enhancing the larger area in future. It could become an environmental park for the future population. Our Ecoteam designed and also has long-term operation responsibility. I want to be part of the design process here was the ability to shut down one of these flow paths and have the other two be able to meet the same treatment standard while one was shut down. Wetland plants don't like to be flooded for long periods of time, so we turn them off, dry the soil out, not down to fully dry and cracking, but enough to get the wetland plants to regenerate. We want the water to trickle and spread and slow right down through the large filter of wetland plants, particularly the litter that they drop with their leaves over time. And what's really important in a wetland system like this is the biofilm. It's like a bacterial colony that grows on the plant surfaces. It's like a sticky gel, and it picks up all the little bits and pieces that flow along in the wastewater, and then the bacteria break them down. It's a beautiful natural process. It's very effective, in particular for getting rid of nutrients that are in wastewater, such as nitrogen, which is a key target for this particular system. And very high standard in the licence. Very high quality naturalised water will flow from this constructed wetland to the Logan River.
Heaps of snails everywhere. The more macroinvertebrates in the system, the better it is, ecologically and water quality wise.